The Man Upstairs is a beautiful film. I may be slightly biased because I love Katharine Hepburn, but I did think it was really enjoyable. This was released in 1992, directed by George Schaefer, written by James Prideaux, and we have Katharine Hepburn as Victoria Brown and Ryan O'Neill as Mooney Polaski. And Mooney has escaped from prison, and he decides to hide out in the attic of Victoria's house. And Victoria catches him in the middle of the night raiding her fridge because he's absolutely starving, and she decides to let him stay. And I won't say exactly how she comes to this conclusion and how that comes about, but everything does make sense. Her actions are believable, and Mooney's actions are very believable as well, because I had maybe wrongly assumed that he would, beg her to let him stay, but actually he threatened violence to begin with, which I think was a lot more in keeping with his character. And throughout this, Mooney displays some negative personality traits, which I think made a lot of sense. It helped to make his character seem a lot more realistic, but more than anything, he was actually really likable. You could tell that he had a troubled past, and that's why he turned to this life of crime. That's not to excuse anything he did, but I think he's a very well-written character, with a very well-written past, and a lot of kind of believable things in his life that have led to where he is now. Victoria, I believe, let him stay because she was lonely. I think her motivations are not quite as clear, but I think she saw something in him that reminded her of perhaps other people in her life, which I won't say too much about. I don't want to spoil it, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is the narrative on paper might seem a bit far-fetched, but everything makes a lot of sense. And what I didn't expect as well is that there's some comedy in this. It's dry humor, and it's subtle, and it's just every now and then, but it definitely helps to lift things up a little bit. And it's also very unpredictable. I had no idea how this would resolve itself, what would happen to Mooney, and I will, with a spoiler warning, discuss the ending because I have some thoughts on that. But the majority of this is set in Victoria's house. A lot of it is set at the dinner table, eating food, but that kind of makes sense because Mooney's, he's been in prison without decent food, so you can imagine that he'd want a lot of the delicious foods that he's been deprived of. And as we get to know him, as Victoria does, I think it's very easy to like him, and that makes it a very confusing experience because obviously you don't want to like him. He's a criminal who's escaped from prison, but at the same time he's a human being with real feelings and emotions and a troubled past that wasn't necessarily his fault. His upbringing definitely didn't seem very good. Again, it doesn't excuse what he did, but it helps to show that there are different sides to every story. I was very curious to see what would happen because I had no idea what direction this would take or how it would conclude, and I have to say, I found it really compelling and really enjoyable. Victoria as a character is wonderful. At this stage in her career, Katharine Hepburn played a lot of headstrong older women who were very atypical of, she comes across as being this frail old woman who needs help around the home. And this is what we get. She's got a cook, Molly, who's a pretty great character, actually, played by Helena Carroll. But when it comes down to it, she's feisty and fiery and just absolutely fabulous and an absolute joy to watch her performance. So I guess I'll discuss the ending now. I do think the ending was... Well, spoilers before I get into it. Spoilers from now, I'll discuss the ending. So, at the end of the film, I genuinely, within the last kind of 3 minutes, I didn't know what was going to happen. And I actually was genuinely convinced that Mooney would take his own life. And I'm glad he didn't. But I also don't necessarily believe it because Victoria was harbouring a criminal, and that's a criminal offence, at least in the UK. I assume it is in most states of America. And really, she should have also been arrested. I'm glad she wasn't, but I do feel like it was maybe a tiny bit unrealistic. But as long as you can look past that and appreciate what Mooney did, and I think it's ultimately a really enjoyable film. Really thoroughly enjoyed The Man Upstairs. Katharine Hepburn was fantastic. Ryan O'Neill was great as well, of course. And absolutely a film that I recommend.